The Atlantic Charter. Shortly after the German invasion of the Soviet Union, Churchill and FDR met and discussed war policy and aims for once the Axis powers were defeated. Keep in mind, the United States had not actually entered the war yet. They decided that once the Axis powers were defeated, there would be no territorial changes contrary to the wishes of the inhabitants. This is known as self-determination, which, to put it simply, is the opposite of imperialism. You are allowing the people of each nation to determine their own government and their own leaders. It also called for a permanent system of general security. Later, this would become the foundation of the United Nations. In addition to providing for general security, aims were to uphold free trade, guarantee freedom of the seas, and other vague things such as assure the general prosperity and freedom from want. Soon after this, this statement was released. They met and released this statement on August 14th, 1941. Soon after this was released, Stalin endorsed the agreement. Of course, he had no intention of keeping the self-determination part. Okay, the Lend-Lease Act of 1941. Before this time, the United States had been selling weapons and supplies to Britain and other European nations under a system called cash and carry. Basically, Britain had to pay cash for the weapons and they had to provide the ships to transport them across the Atlantic by themselves. Well, Britain was running short of cash, so Churchill and Roosevelt cut a deal that in exchange for more than 50 somewhat outdated U.S. naval ships, the United States would be given 99-year leases on British military bases in the Caribbean and Newfoundland. Churchill, in 1940, told Roosevelt that Britain was almost out of money. Now, keep in mind, Roosevelt was running for re-election in 1940 and won in November on the promise of keeping the United States out of World War II while all of this was happening. Roosevelt realized that something had to be done, though, and he convinced Congress to pass a law allowing him to lend or lease war equipment and supplies to Great Britain, and payment could be deferred as long as Roosevelt wanted, and payment could be made in any way, in any form that Roosevelt wanted. Later, this was expanded to China and the Soviet Union. It effectively ended American neutrality. The U.S. was not involved in actual combat, but it was supplying Britain and then the Soviets and China. And eventually, as the war went on, this would be extended to more than 30 countries, including governments in exile, such as the Free French, led by General Charles de Gaulle, the Polish government in exile, and more than $50 billion would be spent by the United States to send supplies to all of these nations. $50 billion is a lot of money now. It was even more money in the 1940s.